Hello, and welcome to the official podcast of the Cleveland International Film Festival, SIF Speaks, sponsored by Wayside Furniture. I'm Dee Perry, and I'm joined by my producer and co-host, Aaron Spears. And Aaron, we're coming to the end of SIF 45 streams tonight.
I know, Dee, and that means this is the closing episode of SIF Speaks as well. But I can't think of a better film to go out on than the one we're going to talk about today.
I agree, Aaron. TOPOWA, Never Give Up, takes the viewer on a visual, oral, and emotional journey that's hard to forget. And I'm very pleased to welcome the co-director of that film and the cinematographer, Philip Sansom. Philip, thank you so much for joining us on SIF Speaks. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Well, I want to talk about the fact that your film production company is based in London, and most of the action of TOPOWA, Never Give Up, takes place in Uganda. So how did you come to know about the young teacher musicians you follow in the film?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those amazingly serendipitous events, really, where different paths align to come together to make something of real, what I hope is a really amazing story. You know, I think I bumped into Inigo, the co-director of this film, just on a night out with some friends that we were mutually introduced to, and he kind of understood that I'd made music documentaries before. And a few weeks later, came to me saying, I've just caught wind of this amazing thing that's happening out in Uganda. There's a charity called Brass for Africa, which a friend of mine is part of. And they're bringing 12 musicians to the UK to play with the amazing Wynton Marsalis, which, of course, perked my ears up immediately. I mean, I was a drummer myself for many years and a great love of music. And as a filmmaker and a documentary maker, that story to me just sounded incredible. So I'd never been to Africa before, but we'd had a great year, our company, and I was really keen to do something that was, charitable in nature, because I feel so passionately that, you should give back where you can. And as filmmakers, we can use our voices now more than ever to really make a difference and highlight stories that really wouldn't be heard otherwise. So Inigo, myself, and my brother Rupert, who's the producer of the film, we jumped on a plane and went out for a recce to Uganda to see if there was a story in it, because we weren't really sure at the time. It could have just been, a bit more difficult than we thought. And also identifying characters and narrative threads that would really hold for 80 minutes was something that we really needed to investigate more. But within, half an hour of landing and meeting the guys there, it was obvious that there was an incredible story to tell. So we took our London team, just a small handful of people really from London. It was myself, Rupert, Matt, and Callum, who were the UK crew. And then we partnered up with some local fixers, which Rupert found out in Uganda. Incredible team out there, Soundy, Andrew, Driver. Not a big crew, but some Londoners landed in Uganda and were treated very well. So we were very lucky to find everything we needed.
If I could ask you just to put on your cinematographer hat here for a second, of your many roles on this film, what were the challenges you faced shooting on locations in Uganda where some things that we may take for granted when we're filming, like just power supplies, might be kind of an issue? So could you speak to kind of your cinematographer journey in this film?
I mean, it so rolled into one, really, kind of trying to just make this film happen, because it was happening so quickly. Once we'd been on the recce, the tour was going to happen in 3 or 4 weeks. So we had to get straight back out there and really start to pick it up. So there wasn't really time to engage a cinematographer other than myself, really. And also there was no time to raise any money. So we had to fund it ourselves. So really it was, roll up the sleeves and put on many hats for everybody, including, our assistants. But we took out bags and bags and bags of batteries with us on that flight to Uganda. I think we had to spread the load of lithium-ion batteries across 5 people to get them through the airport. It's quite a heavy load of equipment. We had gimbals, we had 2 red cameras, we had a drone which we had to put into a rucksack and pretend it wasn't a drone, and really just, find ways to take everything that we thought might need, because you really don't know what you're going into. Obviously, we'd had time out there in the recce, but in the slum villages and these informal settlements around Kampala, there isn't a reliable power source. It does go dark and many people live without electricity. So luckily we had the base of Brass for Africa's headquarters there, which is quite well set up. It's got generators if it does kind of experience a power failure. And obviously our driver had a good vehicle for us, which is essential for moving around locations. But yeah, certainly as a cinematographer on the job, we didn't choose super lightweight equipment because we wanted to elevate it really to look as feature-like as possible. So we were shooting, 5K red with, prime PL mounted vintage lenses actually. So I chose some K35 lenses, which are some really nice old glass that my friend Simon lent me for the project, and that just gave it a little bit of a softer look to it. And we shot wide open, pretty much natural light, but we took out some little light packets that did the job when we were doing interviews. But yeah, I mean, it was nonstop and very hard to get into the slums as well because you're carrying a lot with you. So we were lucky that we had a lot of enthusiastic helpers from the local community and from Brass for Africa, young kids who were following us everywhere, wanting to get involved. Best Day, who's one of the guys on the tour, he is actually a budding filmmaker himself, so he was very keen to get involved, and we had a lot of support. But it was an endurance test. Let's put it that way. I mean, we shot,
sure,
I think a couple of weeks straight, really, in Uganda. I sweated every day, and had to do some good stretching at the end of the day, and some yoga in the morning to kind of get up and do it all again. Because the other problem with this being, well, not a problem, but when you're doing an observational documentary, it's not like you're going back retrospectively to look back over the life of somebody or plan interviews with people. You're filming things as they happen, so you want to be there all the time as much as you can without being too invasive and everyone telling you to rack off.
Right.
So the hours were long, and I pushed the crew really hard because also you see what these guys are doing, and they're the teacher trainers that are there, and the musicians themselves are so giving and put so much energy and love and passion into what they're doing that as a filmmaker and as a cameraman, I wanted to do the same. So if they were out there doing it, I was out there doing it too. So we really put everything we could into it. So I hope that showed on screen. But it was a difficult one to work out how to choose how we were going to make it look. But we combined several different techniques to try and elevate what would often be shot on lightweight DV cameras for an observational documentary like that into something that looked a little bit more feature-like.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, and it does work. It's a good-looking film. But I wanted to touch for a minute on the children that you mentioned, because at the beginning of the film, you give us a graphic that states 50% of Uganda's population is children under 14, and 70% of them have no access to welfare or education. It gives you pause when you see those children on screen. And I wanted to have you talk a bit about how the organization you follow, Brass for Africa, is trying to make a dent in those numbers.
Yeah, I mean, it was a really staggering statistic to come across, really. Even, when I was out there meeting Jim Trott, the founder of Brass for Africa, I mean, what he's doing is incredible. And he's working across Rwanda, Liberia, and Uganda, and really trying to make a difference to all kinds of social issues, HIV, the stigmas involved with that, disability awareness, and working with orphans in situations where, they're growing up with very little, and having to look after siblings. And it's incredibly hard to believe that this still goes on. But, Uganda is an amazing country, and people there are incredibly joyful, and it's a beautiful place with amazing landscapes and very modern cities. Like, Kampala is a modern city, but like all places, they have incredibly tough parts of town, and the slum villages are those, and people are marginalized on the side of society, just like they are in England, or I'm sure in America too. And, it's the children that suffer. Immediately, I met people who had 30 brothers and sisters in Uganda. Our driver was one of 30 children by 5 different women. And they have to fend for themselves sometimes. And, they run around in packs in the slums, just picking up rubbish, going through trash. and they really don't have any access or anyone looking after them, so they have to fend for themselves. And a lot of them are, fleeing from wars or refugees, from migratory refugees looking for places to work. Their parents might be going into the city whilst they're left at home to fend for themselves. And Brass for Africa really are raising awareness and giving these children visibility in the community, because so often they're just left to be picked up on the streets by the police and taken to places like Kampangisa, or getting into criminal activities just to make a living. And Brass for Africa is giving life skills and a real opportunity for these kids to help themselves. These it's not just giving kids music or a trumpet in the hands. It's rebuilding, broken kind of self-values. It's giving them the ability to stand up in front of people and say who they are, to be able to play a solo in front of a group. As they work through with these kids, they're really bringing out some traumatic, kind of harrowing things that they've gone through, but they're relearning how to be people and to value themselves and have skills and have abilities, and the smiles and the laughs and the power of music really to break through those things and rebuild their lives and give them opportunities, because workplace readiness is something they talk about a lot at Brass for Africa. And I think through the music and what Jim's done there is create a curriculum really that takes them all the way through the system there at Brass for Africa. And at the end, they can become teachers themselves, and they go back to the communities where they've come from, and they offer the same skills and the same opportunities to where they come from. And that's just an amazing thing to see, and the passion that those people go back with, and how respected they are in the community. If you've got a Brass for Africa t-shirt on and you're walking through Catway, for example, everybody knows where you come from, and nobody's going to mess with you. Nobody's going to try and rip you off or abuse you or take you for granted, because they've raised the awareness and the visibility of those children. So it is staggering how many young kids are in the population, because it's population explosion there. Really, it's a demographic of very, very young, and the life expectancy is not long. In some of those slums, it's 40 years old is the life expectancy. But obviously, they're trying to change that as much as they can. But certainly, empowering young children through music is definitely at the core of what Brass for Africa are doing. It's quite remarkable.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to circle back because you'd mentioned Wynton Marsalis and his role within the film as we're watching it. But for most of the film, he's more of an idea than a physical presence in there. Can you talk about what he represented to the participants in Brass for Africa, for those young brass players?
Yeah, I guess we didn't even know at the beginning if we would get to play with Wynton, if it would really happen. There was talk of it. We undertook the film, with the kind of concept that, of course, everything's going to work out perfectly and it's all going to be perfect. We're going to get to England and we're going to play with Wynton and it'll be the big finale for the film. We could see that narrative in our dream minds. This is where it's going to go. It's how it's going to play out.
Fingers crossed.
But most of the kids hadn't even got passports or visas yet. And that was incredibly difficult. So having this kind of vision, this goal in everybody's mind of where we're going to get to, was just this really powerful driving force that really clubbed everybody together and built this kind of never give up attitude. It really was this kind of, we're going to do it, we're going to make it happen, we're going to will it into existence. And obviously Jim, Andrew and the Brass for Africa team worked, tirelessly to make this happen and find the money and raise the funds to even travel these young musicians out to the UK. But I guess what he represents to the musicians there is an opportunity to have the opportunity as a kid from Catway to play on a stage in one of the oldest music festivals in the world with one of the greatest jazz legends of all time. It almost seems like something of a fantasy.
Yeah.
And, I think to have that goal and that opportunity to show people what they can do and to tell their story whilst they play their music, because the way they perform that show as a band, Brass for Africa band, they tell stories in between each song about where they've come from or some of the things they've been through. And it's a really, engaging, piece of music and storytelling, really, not just about Brass for Africa, but about those musicians. And Wynton, obviously, he's from, I think it's New Orleans, and his story, with his father, there's some parallels there of learning music always when you're a young musician, and they're two roads really. One of this kind of looming figure of real musical power, and then these young budding kind of really young talents that are going to kind of collide and meet for this big moment, and that's tantalizing. And that was something that we tried to kind of use as a narrative kind of arc, where we set it up at the beginning about how much, and it's true that Julius, the young trombone player, for him, Wynton was one of the people that he used to look up online when he was learning music, and he would see people on YouTube, or the YouTube as he calls it, and that was just an inspiring thing for him to see how amazing Wynton was.
Mm-hmm.
So he would practice with his friends Ivan, and they had a little jazz band. There's a few clips of them when they were quite young, with really quite competent jazz music that they're playing there, and to hear that story. I mean, we see that lovely bit of them all gathered at the very beginning of the film around a television, which they call the cinema, in the slums there, and they're watching Wynton, and that's YouTube playing, and that's how they watch and even learn music, because a lot of them play by ear. I mean, obviously they learn music through Brass for Africa, but that's quite rare, for musicians in Uganda and in the slums. A lot of it's ear, a lot of, they call it memory music, and they play songs that way. But yeah, I guess Wynton for them was just the pinnacle of musical kind of ability, and that's where they want to get to.
Yeah,
and I guess coming full circle, that's where we get to at the end of the film, which was a hard thing to actually achieve, but it did happen.
Yeah.
And Wynton was very magnanimous and gave his time. I had to stand outside of his dressing room till I think 11:30 before we got the interview. But, he's a busy man.
Yeah. Well, on the flip side of that, what role do you see Jim and Andrew in Brass for Africa, and, well, I guess more specifically the teacher musicians playing for the Ugandan children that see them play? Is that maybe their Wynton Marsalis moment, kind of passing on, that dream to the next generation?
Yeah, I mean, those guys are like rock stars now I'm sure when they go back through their local slums and local villages, and I think it's so inspirational for young kids in the community to know and hear what they've done, because they not only played with Wynton, but 4 of them are now playing in the British military band. Not spoiler alert, I guess, but it's quite an amazing achievement to get to level 8 musicianship wise and get into one of the most challenging bands there is for brass music.
Yeah.
And that's an opportunity to get out from where you've come from, to earn money. Some of those guys are sending back money to home, and that's really got a lot of those families through lockdown, because they're in full-time employment in the UK, and that's a real aspirational goal for a lot of those young musicians and young kids in those areas to have a route out. And if they can see guys and girls that have come from the same areas that they've come from, have been through the same hardships that they've been through, and they understand when they go back and teach to those same kids, they understand where they come from, and they can say, look, I did this, and you can too,
Right.
And music is that way that can help you do that. And, we couldn't go back for a premiere, but we did hire a large room, and put the film on once it'd been finished, and gave them all their own kind of film premiere where they all got dressed up to go. And Samaya put on a beautiful dress, and
awesome.
Ivan had a tie and a suit on him. We did a little Zoom link up with everybody. It was emotional because they didn't know really how much they were featured in the film, and they'd never seen anything. They'd never been on camera before. And they did magnificently to give us that time. And, they had their photo taken out the front of the building. Like it was their own red carpet night. And I think everybody was so ecstatic really to see it. And I think hopefully we can get back out there and play it in, the villages and slums where we filmed, and for everyone to see what can be done with the power of music.
I want to talk a little bit about some of the nuts and bolts of putting the film together. Like, For instance, I immediately noticed the chapter headings on different scenes, and I wondered why you use that as an organizing device.
Yeah, well, that's well noticed. I think, yeah, I mean, we shot a lot of footage, and we were following a band with 12 members. And there was also a story not only about the musicians, but also about the charity, and Brass for Africa
Right.
itself. And it was a very complicated narrative, really, to start to kind of unpick and to create into a working structure. So the edit was long. I mean, we were very lucky we shot it before the world stopped, because it gave me
Mhm.
lockdown to actually,
Right.
sit and do it myself. And I had intended to really come back with the footage and inspire people to kind of give us some funding. And we pursued a few roads, but I think with COVID and things, it became apparent it was impossible really to make that work. So again, it fell to us to edit it ourselves at Fix, and we rolled up our sleeves there, and putting in a 90-minute. I mean, I think it started out as a 2.5-hour film, with, and then it was so heartbreaking to have to pick which stories to put in and who to leave on the cutting room floor. And obviously, Julius and Samaya are the kind of lead narratives that we follow, but to use these headings of different chapters, as you like, was something that allowed me to just define what each part of the film was about. And I mean, I guess I'd watched too many Wes Anderson movies and thought I should try a bit of that in my own style.
Hey, it
But
works.
it
It
did
Yeah.
does.
work,
It
because
does.
we really had to be spelling it out quite clearly. This section's about getting passports and visas. This section's about Brass for Africa, and move on through that narrative quite quickly. To the core story of
Mhm.
getting
Yeah.
good, getting ready to move and to fly. We wanted to be out of Kampala in Uganda within 50 minutes, really, and then it's kind of a sprint to the finish through the UK section. I mean, they did so many things when we were in the UK. They played for local schools. They were playing gigs on streets. They went to meet other disadvantaged children in the UK, and they did so much on that tour. I mean, they were all exhausted by the end of it, but
Wow.
they reached out in a way that just everybody responded to them incredibly. But we could have told so many different stories, but we had to pare it down, and we made the finale of the show the final hero moment where they play with Winton. And yeah, it was brutal to edit out so much stuff, but I'm hoping they can use other things for pieces for the charity, and we'll give them all the rushes to work with as well later. So, and maybe some other things yet to come.
And two, we were talking earlier about how the look of the film. One of the things that really caught my eye was the overhead shots, and I wondered if you were doing that with drones or some other way.
Well, yes, we were using drones. I mean, it is quite hard to get hold of drones in Uganda, must be said.
Mm.
There are local guys there that we knew that had them, and we started out working with them. But I think because it's such a vast and beautiful country, and the kind of,
Right.
I guess the landscape is so unique, and it's red dirt and vibrant kind of greens. I think we really needed to get a perspective of where we are from the air, really, to set the location. And we ran into some young guys there that did drone flying and had done some before, so they did have shots that we could dip into. But my brother's also a very good drone pilot,
Ah,
fortunately, was able to grab a few shots here and there, shall we say. We had police escorts coming with us on some of the trips down to the slums and things like that. So yeah, we made sure that everything was done, as best it can be. But we like to get a bird's eye view of what's going on, and I think those shots just really set the scenes. And as we were moving, especially with Samaya, because it's so dense, those villages from the air. When you look down, you see all the little shanty huts and houses that have been cobbled together. You get a real sense of the density of how people are living. And
Mhm.
as we move down from the bird's eye view into Samaya's house and she's practicing, yeah, that really was just something I always had in my mind, that was an image and a vision for how we wanted to kind of introduce her character. But Yeah, we find that
Excellent.
that combination works really well for us on other projects. We did it before on a few documentaries that we've worked on previously, and I think just combining those really close up, kind of in the moment, personal experiences where you're interviewing somebody or spending time with them, and then the vast epic wides that set the scene of where you are, just makes a kind of nice visual contrast, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of like kind of the personal experiences here, you're obviously not a subject of the documentary, but I was curious what personal experience or moments you took away from making this film.
So many. So many. I mean, it was one of the toughest things I think I've ever filmed, just in terms of the kind of physical aspect of the intense period of work that we put in on it.
Hmm.
But that is something that you give gladly when you see what people are living with every day in places like Katwe and Namawongo, and I'd never been to those places really, or I've been traveling and I have seen a fair bit of this beautiful planet, but they're some of the toughest slums in the world, not just Africa. And when you're filming a little girl, 5 years old, collecting water from a drain, which is dirt, basically, you want to do something, and you want to, you're like, I should put the camera down really and give her a hand.
Yeah.
But it goes on every day, and it's a part of life there, and they don't grumble; they get on with it. And actually, there's more smiles and joy and happiness amongst those people than I even see in London. Kids here on their mobile phones with miserable faces.
Yeah.
There they're running on the street barefoot with a stick and a wheel and having an amazing time. So, I think things that stuck with me were some of the hard things, but also the joy and the smiles and
Hmm.
these are people that I will definitely be friends with for the rest of my life, I think. And just, the attitude and the positivity that sings through in the face of adversity with everything that they were doing, I think comes through the
Hmm.
lens in the film. I really didn't want to make a documentary that was this kind of like negative, heavy, hard watch, which, often you find, these things can focus on, and it's so easy to focus on the bad and make something that hits hard. But I think you can still have an impact, but shine a light on the positive things. And more than anything, I took
Yeah.
away that positive aspect from what these guys were doing. And the lasting memory of seeing Julius and Winton on stage soloing together, I think, was definitely a highlight.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
it was gorgeous, gorgeous. And you just said something that reminded me of something that you capture Winton saying in the film, that he knew these children had had hard lives, but in giving them the little time that he could, he didn't want to focus on the hardness. He wanted to teach them as if they could they had already lifted themselves, and he was going to try and push them further. It's a wonderful moment in the film, and I'm so glad I got a chance to see it, and that you could share it with the world.
Yeah, I mean, Winton has an incredible way of having a view that is so leveling,
Hmm.
with everybody. He doesn't give you a special treatment. He's like, "Come on, let's do it," and that's so right in so many ways. You may have had a hard time when you grew up, but that doesn't make you incapable of learning difficult music or being excellent at what you do. And to push yourself and to elevate yourself is something we can all aspire to do. And that was, when I was filming it, I was almost thinking, God, that's quite hard. It's been quite tough on these guys. but, but at the same time, when I reviewed it and I came to the edit, I was suddenly struck by how powerful that message really was, and how right it was as well. So yeah, I'm very grateful that we got that time with Minton, and was able to capture, an interview that does bring the film to a real kind of close in that kind of overarching perspective
Yeah.
of what does it mean to us all. And it doesn't matter where you come from. I think that's another thing he says. It's what you do, it's where you're going.
We've done quite a lot with this film. I'm hoping to hear more stories that come out of it. And thank you so much again for sharing it with us.
Oh, my pleasure. It's what we make films for, and to have it in festivals across the world, especially out with you guys, is an absolute dream come true. So, the more people that can see it, hear about those stories that otherwise wouldn't be heard. So that's why we decided to fund the film and to make it. And I mean, that's not my story, but I know that the film wouldn't have happened if I hadn't been involved. But it's all down to those guys and what they do. And this is for them, for sure.
Philip, thank you so much. We've been talking with Philip Sansom, a co-director and the cinematographer of the documentary TOPOWA, Never Give Up. Find out more about the film when you log on to the SIF website, clevelandfilm.org. I'm Dee Perry.
And I'm Aaron Spears.
We want to thank our sponsor for this podcast, Wayside Furniture, keeping it local since 1937. We also want to remind you to support your local film festival. Please consider a donation to the SIF Challenge Match presented by Cuyahoga Arts and Culture. Our goal is to reach $145,000 this year to support the future of our festival, and we're grateful for any amount you're able to contribute. To donate, please visit clevelandfilm.org. And thank you for listening to SIF Speaks.